Welcome, everybody. I'm extremely pleased to see such a full house. This is probably one of the most exciting sessions, I think, that you could attend. It is about the global impact of China's consumer class. My name is Xueling, and I am with Channel NewsAsia, and we have developed this session editorially with the great cooperation of the World Economic Forum. China's consumer class is quite incredible. Over the next decade, it's projected that they will spend up to $56 trillion. And already last year, in 2016, we saw them contribute 20% of global GDP growth came from domestic Chinese consumption. So the really interesting question is, how is the Chinese consumer changing? And how are they going to change the world? With me to answer this extremely interesting question is my very distinguished panel. On the far end, we have Mr. Xuan Xuan, who is the president of Nielsen, Greater China. Next to him is Mr. Dai Wei. Mr. Dai Wei is one of the founders and the CEO of Ofo Bike. You will know him as the man who likes the color yellow. Next to him is Mr. Zeng. Mr. Zeng Qinghong is another person also with transportation, except a little bit bigger. That is Guangzhou Auto Industry Group. And next to me here is Mr. Liu Shijin, or Dr. Liu Shijin, I should say, is actually the vice chairman of China's Research Development Foundation. So, before we did this whole panel, we actually asked WEF participants, as well as Channel NewsAsia viewers, to do a poll. We asked them certain questions, and this was the question we asked them. Do Chinese consumers prefer made in the West versus made in China? And this is what they said. 60% of around 1,000 respondents said, yes, they still prefer made in the West, while 40% said, no, they don't. Now, the question I'm going to kick off with Dr. Liu is this an old-fashioned point of view? Is this actually something that has changed? But that's something that somehow we seem to think about the Chinese consumer. So, Dr. Liu, what do you think? Is this really something that still holds?
So about 10 to 20 years ago, there might be more people, well, might be more than 60. So it might be about 70 to 80% of the people who prefer to buy Western goods. However, things are changing tremendously in recent years. For example, the domestic appliances. For another example, the auto industry. The SUV produced by Guangzhou Auto Industrial Group is selling very well in the market. And also another example, OFO bike. So a few years ago, we didn't know anything about OFO, but it is now very famous, and it is typical of a Chinese brand. And you won't be able to find this brand overseas. At present, OFO bike is developing itself overseas. So things are changing tremendously in this year, recent years, and they have changed their perceptions in recent years. So at the very beginning, cost was the most important, but now the added value is more important. For example, now people are getting more interested in the logos, which shows that they are focusing more on the quality of goods.
Known because at least Ofo is very well known even in Singapore. It's been launched there, and the irony is that many people don't realize that it's a Chinese brand. They think it's an international brand or possibly even a Southeast Asian brand.
Yeah, 3 years ago when we started our business, because all of our founders, we are cyclists, we love bike. So we want to do something with bike. So we have this name, OFO. The 3-letter combined is look like a bike. So we think people from different country, different culture can understand what we're doing. It's something about bike. So now we have service in Singapore, in US, UK, and recently we just launched Kazakhstan with the Expo 2017. And a lot of people from in the Expo campus, they use our bike for short distance commute. So yeah, it's a dream for us. In future, we can provide service around every country, every city, the yellow bike for the very green transportation.
Okay, but I will now move the question to Mr. Zeng concerning just what Dr. Liu said. In the beginning, GAC had a lot of cooperations with, okay, perhaps not Western, but definitely with Honda, Toyota. But now you're producing own brand cars. Do you really think that the Chinese consumer wants brands which are Chinese, exclusively Chinese, and not without that little bit of, a glamour that comes from it supposedly being Western or Japanese or just being different, not Chinese?
Thank you very much. And thank you very much, Dr. Liu, for your recognition of our brand. Our company, the Guangzhou Auto Industry Group, was set up through working together with the Toyota, Honda. As a result, so we have greatly improved our capital and as well as the product. So at the present, we have our own indigenous brand, especially the SUV. At present, we rank the top in the Chinese market. And this fact shows that the Chinese consumers have recognized the Chinese brand. So, for example, the G logo has been widely accepted by the consumers, which represents the quality, our commitment to the consumers, as well as the quality of our services. And this has demonstrated the recognition of the Chinese consumers. So at the very beginning, we plan to produce 100,000 cars, but as a matter of fact, we produced 320,000 cars last year. According to the poll you shared with us just now, 60% of the local people prefer the Western-made products. But it might be true in some cases. However, things are beginning to change. So at present, we sell about 280,000 cars each year, so ranking the top.
Is there a difference between perception and actually what is reality?
Yeah, absolutely. So Nielsen is the world's largest data company. Let me just speak with data to illustrate the point. I think the answer that you asked, is somewhat out of fashion. Here's why. If you look at the fast-moving consumer goods categories, of the 32 major categories, domestic brands are gaining market share over multinational brands. The gain or loss is highly dependent on what people put in their mouth and what they're put on their skin. And they're extremely careful about the choices they make. In the case of infant milk formula, in the case of diapers, stuff that mothers buy for babies, boy, they're extremely careful. They want to make sure they get the best, the safest, and the brands that they trust the most. Of course, the domestic brands are also gaining. If you look at the dairy market, concern over safety and health is really overwhelming. But
well, that's on the back of the 2008 terrible incident with the milk powders.
Exactly.
Yes.
But the page has turned. The largest market shareholder in China is a Chinese company. It's not a multinational company anymore. So with over 20% market share, which is pretty amazing. So that's the fast-moving consumer space. If you look at automotive, the two gentlemen that spoke, on auto, already touched on this topic. So let me just talk about the overall market share. If you look at the domestic brands market share in China, 3 years ago, roughly 31% of the market were dominated by domestic brands. But today, as of 2016, 35% is the market share for domestic brands. So that increase is pretty phenomenal. And then in particular to GAC, Mr. Zeng's company, their first quarter sales shot off to 34%, which is phenomenal. And of course, if you look at the average selling price of their vehicles, it's among really the highest. And then of course the brand recognition is really on par with quite a few of the multinational brands as well. Of course, they're a partner to several multinational brands, and it's hard to tell the difference, but they somehow have distinguished themselves as really one of the most sought after domestic brands.
Well, if I were to ask the panel, and then I will also ask you here in the audience, when do you think, though, we're going to get a reverse in the numbers to that poll? In other words, when are we going to reach the day when people will say, yes, 60% will say, we prefer a made-in-China brand over a made-in-the-West brand? So when are we going to see that? And I'm going to give you a time limit. Do you think we're going to see it within this coming decade? Within the next 10 years, are we going to see a reverse? So a quick show of hands, sir. Which of you think that we can see it within the next decade?
I believe it will happen in 2020.
In 2020, guys, 2020, okay. Mr. Zeng, when do you think it will happen?
The better, the sooner the better. The sooner the better. And of course, if you don't have the right quality, it's impossible for you to have the good brand. So consumers are objective, and consumers focus more on quality. So if we can have the quite right quality, now we will soon have the kind of reverse of numbers you mentioned just now. Yes, I fully agree. The most important thing is to improve the quality of the products. So I believe that in about 3 to 5 years, there might be a change. If you do a poll at that time, so you might see the change
happening. So if you look at a number of categories, for example, consumer electronics in China, of course, the differentiation for consumer electronics really is not that great anymore. And then in terms of food, particularly food that doesn't require cooking, and then beverages that have local flavors, that claim local innovation. These are already more preferred by the Chinese consumers. So if you don't take a broad brush and ask that question, you look at each category by category, it's already happening.
Okay, let's look at the audience and let's see whether or not we'll do a show of hands. How many of you believe that we're going to see a reverse, that we're going to see a preference for Chinese-made goods over Western-made goods within the next 10 years? Those of you who think so, please raise your hands. And I will ask Mr. Yen to help me, since he's the numbers man. What do you think? Oh dear, you do not agree with the panel. You seem to be much more pessimistic. Do you think that Chinese brands are going to be 60%, or rather they're going to be the ones who dominate? No. So I'm afraid that you have not convinced them that you may believe so, but obviously not the audience. In fact, actually, at this point, I'm going to throw it open to the audience. We're not going to keep this so formal. So does anyone have any questions for the panel concerning this idea of brand and quality, which is really what the whole poll question was about? No questions at the moment? Yes, okay. Gentleman over there, yes.
您好，我是钛媒体的记者。
Good afternoon. I would like to put a question to Mr. Dai. You mentioned that, so in 2020, so about 60% of the population will prefer the China-made products. So what evidence do you have to support your conclusion? Well, every year, so we have been making progress. So therefore, we should look into the future, and that might be accelerated growth in the coming years. I believe that in about 3 to 5 years, so things will be different. But anyway, so we're going to see an accelerated growth, and this is the trend in the future. Maybe 3 or 4 or 5 years' time, we're going to see the difference.
Ryan, you can come back. We'll come back to you later.
谢谢那个刚才各位。
Thank you very much. So how do you understand brand? And brand includes quality and the brand itself, or rather the logo. And they represent a kind of a perception of the product, which tells a good story. So how do you understand the concept of a brand? So how come, what makes you think that in 2020, more than 60% of the population will prefer China-made products? Well, China has great advantages. I mentioned just now that a new consumer class is rising, and it can play a very important role. The Chinese market has 3 important advantages. The first one is the large base of consumers, and they will help develop the consumers, the consumption market. So this is the same. This is the case for the auto industry, and it's also the same for the bicycle industry. Second, the consumers are getting more and more particular, and this is a good thing for the market. So in the past, we were not particular at all. So it would be great if you can get some milk to drink, but this is not the case anymore, because people are looking for the milk that is catered to the individual flavor, catered to the individual need. So this shows that the Chinese consumers are getting more and more particular. And thirdly, the Chinese consumers have their own habits and preferences for products, and the Chinese manufacturers and Chinese producers can cater more readily to the needs of the local people. So just now you mentioned that it's important for us to tell a good story about a product. But it seems that there is a wrong trend at present. Some companies are focused more on fabricating stories rather than improve the quality of their products. And therefore, it is very important for the companies to focus on quality, first of all.
Move on now to another poll question that we had. Louis, would you be so kind and bring up the next poll question? Do Chinese consumers care about the environment? I'm afraid that only 24% of WEF participants and Channel News Asia viewers thought so. 76% thought that the Chinese consumer doesn't care about the environment. Is this an unfair assessment again? Let's start with Mr. Yen.
Very unfair. So the Nielsen survey actually shows that 67% of the Chinese consumers care a great deal about the impact of the environment. And if you compare that with 55% in the U.S., I guess then you more or less understand why Trump is in the White House, I guess. And then 69% of the Chinese consumer also responded by saying that they're willing to pay a premium for green and environmentally sound products. So I think that data probably is less representative. And on both scores that I just quoted, the Chinese consumers are way ahead of the world average. So we believe that the awareness is high, and the willingness to pay for a premium is also high. If you look at the success of OFO, I mean, this is not just convenience. This is not about transportation. This is also about environmental protection. This is about, reducing, CO2 emissions. And then if you look at, another transportation provider here, Mr. Zeng's company, electric vehicles in China are selling very well. So 26% of the Chinese consumers indicated that they are willing to buy, all electric or hybrid vehicles. So the awareness is really, really high, and there are people are actually, voting with their wallet.
Well, I will then ask a naughty question to Mr. Zeng and ask him if he should be worried about Mr. Dai Wei sitting next to him. Because a recent McKinsey report actually said that ride-hailing apps like Uber and even possibly things like bike sharing are going to reduce the number of cars that we're going to buy. And in fact, they projected it's possible that it's as much as 20%. We will all be moving to public transportation and we won't be buying cars so much anymore. So, Mr. Zeng, should you be boxing with the man next to you?
Thank you for your concern. In the morning session, we hear the Premier said that we should have inclusive growth. Although we are competitors to some extent, 2 wheels against the 4 wheels. But we will do a better job in the connection with the public transportation. I think with it's impossible for you to not buy a car if you have a bicycle.
It's from Sinopec. The petroleum consumed in Beijing and Shanghai was reduced by 5% in April and May. And he said in the past 20 months, this number is really stable, but it's suddenly reduced by 5% in April and May. So I think the bike sharing truly helped to reduce the traffic jams, to release the pressure of the big cities' transportation. And I heard that the transportation pressure is reduced by 7.8% in Beijing and Shenzhen. So I believe the bike sharing will be more universal in the future, in every city, every country. But it doesn't, I think it won't influence the sales of the cars.
So you may be safe at least for a little while,
Yeah,
Mr. Zeng.
because I think in future, for example, less people buy private bikes, but we buy more bikes. So maybe in future, maybe less people personal buy cars, but more shared cars on street and more cars in rural area. So I think the sales, the production of the cars may even grow higher, and also the new energy cars will go higher.
Okay, let's now move into one of the major issues that we have, and that is whether or not there is a difference in the Chinese consumer depending on age. Do younger people then like to, ride a OFO bike or its rivals? And are they the ones who are buying all the green cars? Or is there actually some kind of, generally universal trends that we're seeing regardless of age? We always think also as the older consumer being, pretty adverse to doing online things and so on. So let's kick off. What do you think, Dr. Liu? Do you think that there is a difference between how people use their consumption depending on their age?
If it's related, I think it's a weak correlation. Because the new way of consumption, if seen from the environment perspective, old people might not be different from young people, but from fashion perspective, maybe young people will pursue them stronger. If Mr. Zeng and your group have produced a new product, environment-friendly and fashionable in style, maybe it will be more popular among young people. But old people may still prefer those stable models. So young people will seek through the fashionable models. But for environment perspective, I think young people or old people alike. Another example, after OFO came into the market, a colleague similar age as me, we had a meeting. I asked him, I haven't seen you taking your own vehicle. He said, I stopped taking cars. I'm riding a bicycle. I'm riding a bicycle. It's a way of exercise, and it's also environment friendly. So to some extent, these people are like volunteers. Of course, OFO has its own business model. It will earn money. But a lot of people, the reason or the motive behind their riding a bicycle is for exercise, is for contribution to the society. They're like volunteers. So OFO and some other bicycle sharing brand, they have a lot of public welfare events. So among their business model, they have this public interest taken into consideration. So that's the contribution to the society made by this whole industry.
Are we seeing it in the numbers that there's not that big a difference between ages, or rather it's more attitudes, whether you're socially conscious or not socially conscious? Doesn't matter whether you're young or old.
Yeah, I think, there's there's a very big difference. I think the younger generation tend to be more conscious about the need for protecting the environment, which is part of the reason, these, innovative ideas, get to put to work. A lot of the, people don't realize that, if you just think back, say 10 years ago in China, there was hardly any city that required, separation of garbage into recyclables and trash. Now, in every city, that's in practice. To a lot of people, this might be considered, a small progress, but then for a country of close to 1.4 billion people, that's phenomenal. And then, of course, if you look at household energy consumption in China, I'm not talking about industrial energy consumption. People are extremely young and old, conscious and cautious about, energy consumption. People are, of course, money saving is a big motivation, but at the same time, energy preservation, energy consumption, that's another motivation as well. You look at the smog in the cities, people do, complain about these things. They also take actions to do things, to reduce, the days that, that are smog filled. By taking public transportation to work. So these things are happening.
Mr. Zeng, do you see a difference in consumption patterns between young and old?
I think talking about the automobile industry, the positioning are different. The young people, especially people born after the 80s or 90s, they like fashionable cars. In terms of model, in terms of the individualized or personalized demand in the performance. And for the older generation, they are more conservative. For example, low oil consumption, cheaper price, they focus on that. But for automobile industry, I think three things matters. First, energy saving. Second, environment protection. Third, safety and security. I think for automotive industry, this is the permanent topic for us to consider. The direction in the future should be intelligent, connected, and environment-friendly electric vehicles. This is also a demand for the energy perspective. Gradually, the automobile will become intelligent and connected and a mobile transportation tool.
In other words, people don't care anymore about what colors the car comes in or how cute it looks?
I think everyone has his individualized or customized preference. Some like red colors, some like other colors. It's not uniform because the world is diversified.
Throw this open to the floor again. The question being, do you think that there is a difference between the consumption patterns of young people, we can call them millennials, and older persons? Those of you who believe that there is a difference in consumption patterns, would you like to put up your hands? Okay, so a fair number seem to think that there is a difference in consumption patterns. Do any of you have any questions for the panel at this point? Yes, the lady over there in front.
Hi, my name is Elizabeth Knupp. I'm with the Ford Foundation based in Beijing, and I've lived in China for about 20 years. And I surely recognize a big change in people's attention to environmental issues and sort of riding OFO bikes, et cetera. But I have a question about a deeper level of consumer engagement around environmental issues, which is, anyone on the panel see Chinese consumers sort of choosing to not buy certain products that are produced in unsustainable ways? For example, not buying things that are made with palm oil because of the impact on, rainforests in other countries, or sort of a deeper level of consumer activism driving their consumption patterns related to the environment?
Yeah, that's a very good question. Let's take it around, Mr. Zeng.
I want to thank you very much for your good question. Environment protection, especially consumer behavior-driven innovation for the manufacturers, are commonly seen. We see that on the internet, the British university students created some water package. They can wrap up something to eat. Every year, China spends 16 million tons of oil in this. So the manufacturers should be environment aware, starting from production, starting from the source. We need to pay attention to environment because the consumer has such demand. If we solve these problems at the source, the consumers wouldn't need to worry about them. So how to push forward the innovation? Environment is a strong motive. You asked the question, I think there might be two perspectives. First, you have to have the knowledge. For example, the palm oil might hurt the rainforest. But some people might like palm oil and they will buy it. But if they know the consequences, they might have a different alternative. So I think knowledge dissemination matters. The second perspective, if such things happens, the government regulation should also catch up. If some product will hurt the environment, such product may be banned from production from the government regulation. So the government regulation should include some measures.
People from my generation, my classmates, more of them become the vegetarian, and my girlfriend. I love meat. I love beef, a lot of meat, but my girlfriend is vegetarian.
So you even each other out.
And I asked her and also my other classmates why you become vegetarian. They told me because the vegetables they consume less, because if the meat they consume more. That really impressed me because I never thought about it. But now I eat more vegetables and less meat now.
Can I ask you a question, though, Mr. Dai Wei? And that is, do users of ofo bikes ever ask you what happens to the ofo bikes that are spoiled? In other words, is there a certain amount of waste? And what do you do with those bikes?
Yeah, now we have cooperation with the recycle company. And we're also doing the survey with, I don't know, the English name, 雀巢. And we want to build our new bicycle with the recycled bottles of the cafe and the different soft drinks. Yeah, we are do the RD on that new material. And also we'll do the recycle of our bikes with the professional recycle company.
Ms. Yen, do you think that numbers bear this out? That people would actually not buy something if they thought it wasn't, healthy for them, or wasn't made in a good way, or wasn't recycled?
Oh yeah, absolutely. We don't have data, so I'm not speaking, to your question quantifiably. But then if you look at ivory purchase in China, whether it's domestically or by the outbound tourists. I think that, the amount has been significantly reduced. Of course, there's still, a small amount of, smuggling going on, but But, it just can't, compare that with, what was happening before. The second example is shark's fin soup, which used to be a favorite, banquet item. But I don't think now it's fashionable. It's considered to be a good forum to serve shark's fin soup. I really have not been treated to a dinner that served a shark's fin soup for a long time. But like you, I've been back in China for 20 years. But 10 years ago, that was the biggest hospitality you could show, your guests. But now that's disappearing from, dinner tables.
Well, just as a matter of interest, anybody who has had shark's fin soup dinner within the last month, would you put up your hands? Don't worry, we won't throw stones at you. But at least of all the very green-conscious persons here, you're right. Nobody has had shark's fin soup dinner.
Yeah, if you put up your hand, I think Jackie Chan would be very unhappy.
Okay, let's move on to our final round of thoughts, and that is online versus brick and mortar. China seems to be a country that is moving very strongly into online. Does this mean that we are not going to see brick and mortar shops anymore? Are the days of when we would have these malls filled with products, gone? Will we be buying our cars just online? We can look at the specifications, the consumption, and so on and so forth, and we won't have to see it until we actually see the specially painted one with the little Hello Kitty logo at our door. So is brick and mortar the thing of the past? Dr. Liu?
Well, the e-commerce is developing at a surprising speed. So it would be impossible if I had told you 5 years ago that this would happen. And this is because that there is a quick communication between consumers and producers, and also because of the great convenience and the options, so many options, and it is also the result of the quick delivery. And this is exactly why more people are buying goods online. Undoubtedly, this has a great impact on the brick and mortar shops. As a matter of fact, a lot of physical shops are reducing their sales volume, and some of them are closing down. However, at the same time, we have also observed that the new type of physical stores, brick and mortar stores, are appearing. So when you buy goods online, you sometimes feel that you want to touch it. You want to know what it is like. However, at present, it seems that it is impossible. And therefore, if there is a brick and mortar shop where you can feel the goods, what it is like, then it might attract more consumers. So this is a new type of brick and mortar shop. It is still developing, and the trend is picking up, and probably it will also be a trend for the Guangzhou Auto Group. Indeed, the consumption of automobiles is so different from other types of consumption. So you do need to experience it. You need to drive it and try and see what it is like, how it runs, and whether the space suits you or not, or whether it is convenient to run the car or not. So your buying decision is made on top of all this. So this is so different from buying a drink or a jacket. So young people at the present, or to be more exact, about 60% of young people are buying goods online, and I'm sure that this will become a trend in the future, and China might lead the trend in the coming years. We are working together with companies from other countries, but it seems that China is taking the lead at present. We have set up our own service shops where the consumers can try and experience the driving of our car, and we are making the best use of the online services and online facilities in order to identify the needs of the consumers and provide more services for them. 那我想再问一下戴先生，您也是属于这个千禧年一代了，那您买东西的时候
You didn't buy it online. Why didn't you buy it online?
This suit is bespoke, and it's a startup company from one of my classmates. Yeah, so I went to his shop, really tiny shop, and I'm the first one to buy the suit.
Perfect entrepreneur story. But on a daily basis, your more casual clothes, the clothes we see you more often in, a
Yeah.
t-shirt and trousers, where do you buy those?
In shops.
So
Because I cannot wait for the delivering time.
But the delivery times are supposed to be one of the main selling points of online. I'm very surprised.
I don't know. But actually, I want to say about this question. I think the best period for e-commerce has gone. In the past 10 years or 15 years, that's the best time for e-commerce. But now, more and more, the giant of e-commerce like Alibaba and Amazon, they gonna to run shops because they're the different user experience with the online shopping and offline shopping. And also, like the Professor Xu Abu said, the fourth industrial revolution is not only about technology, it's about human. In my industry, the transportation, we also have a comments in our company is the I have to say in Chinese, 就真正的智慧储
And we believe that the most important thing is first to have a humane commuting.
If the one people park the bike in line, and the city is quite good. If the consumer park the bike anywhere, the city will be the chaos. So I think the fourth industry revolution is from 2017. It's not only about technology. So e-commerce, the best period, I think, has gone. In the next decade, I think must be the technology combined with human. And the combination of both can really make the great impact on the future. That's my point.
Mr. Yin?
Yeah, so hopefully you don't leave before the end of this session because I'm sharing a lot of data here, and companies pay a lot of money for our data. Indeed, e-commerce growth in China has been white hot, but now it's red hot. The challenge of large numbers really has set in. If you consider the overall retail landscape, still 75% of total retail happens offline and only 25% online. So don't get too carried away and say, wow, the world, the offline retail world has come to an end. It's not. It's doing very well. And then the other thing you need to look at is there in certain other channels, offline retail actually has been doing pretty well. Three things to look at. Number one, convenience. convenience stores are doing very well. It's growing double digits, and the prices are high, and the retailers are making money, and they're opening up new stores. Smaller formats that are located in neighborhoods, they're doing very well. And then supermarkets and hypermarkets that cater to fresh, are doing very well too. Here's for example, Yonghui, which is a Chinese retailer. It's doing actually very well. Walmart is fighting back as well. So both the multinationals and the local Chinese retailers are also learning to adapt in this kind of competitive environment. So to Mr. Liu's earlier point, O2O, online to offline, offline to online, is something that both retailers and e-tailers need to pay attention to. The recent example of Walmart's acquisition of Whole Foods in the U.S., and then prior, 1 year prior to that, Alibaba's investment in Shanghai Hualian, and Jingdong's announcement to open up, 1 million convenience stores. These are great examples of online to offline and offline to online, the convergence. And then 86%, according to a joint study between Nielsen and JD.com, 86% of all consumers, all shoppers, will do a research before they buy something. They will touch, they will look, they will feel something before they actually buy online. So the opportunities are there, for really, both forms of, players, to work with each other and build, potentially win-win solutions that will ultimately, benefit the greater consumer or, more consumer of the country.
Okay, unfortunately, we're going to have to wind up this session. But remember that one of the most important things about these discussions is that they can continue. You are most welcome to talk to the panelists after, as well as to take the discussion online as well. And one of the things I think that this panel has clearly illustrated is that give up the old stereotypes. They don't apply to the Chinese consumer anymore, and they're going to be influencing all of us in a very different way. I'll leave you with a quote from Albert Einstein. He said that, supposedly at least, he loved to bicycle, that life is like being on a bicycle. To stay on, you have to keep pedaling. And that whoever of our manufacturers, of our service providers who can guess where the Chinese consumer is pedaling to, well, they are the ones to look out for. Thank you very much for being here at this session.